What up? Welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast. Danny Pommells, along with our NBC Sports Philadelphia Sixers writer, Noah Levick. So glad you could join us. We've got plenty of topics to get to per usual. We have actual basketball on the slate tonight. In fact, basketball in the state of Canada, which we haven't seen in quite some time since before the pandemic. So good to see the Raptors kind of being welcomed back to their home arena after playing in Florida for, I guess, a year and a half now. Maybe if you count the bubble, even more than that. But all the same, we're happy to be with you here. Plenty of stuff to get to. We'll talk about that preseason game. Ben Simmons has been docked some pay. I think the excellent segue to get into everything is Joel Embiid's salvo last week that kind of shook the NBA landscape, made national news. I mean, as it should have. It was so revealing and frankly refreshing to hear an NBA star reflect on the situation with Ben Simmons the way he did, Noah, particularly because I feel like the fans have endured so much in this time of the process that some honesty, some openness with so many things that have gone on were really, it was revealing. And I'm curious to get your perspective, especially because you were sitting in the room where all of a sudden he just decides to let go of these feelings. Were people shocked, taken aback, on the edge of their seats? What was it like there, Noah, at the Sixers practice facility?
Yeah, he'd given us a lot of good material earlier in his media availability, talking about why he wants to shoot more threes this year, where he's at from a conditioning perspective, what he thinks of Tyrese Maxey so far. And then this was the last question. Kudos to the Inquirer's Keith Pompey, who asked what his reaction was to reporting from The Athletic, Sam Amick, that Ben Simmons thinks this pairing with Embiid has run its course. And he had a lot to say. So I think the reaction from the reporters in the room was just trying to listen as best as we could and trying to soak it all in. But to me, I think inevitably the words that stood out there were the way he described Simmons's holdout, which is weird, disappointing, borderline kind of disrespectful to the guys fighting for their jobs or fighting for their lives. I don't remember the exact term he used, but that's pretty telling language, I think. And as you said, he was not holding a lot back. That wasn't the only subject he was very honest about. Also shared the opinion that he thinks the Sixers have done a good job of building around Simmons in terms of having a lot of high quality 3-point shooting and acquiring a stretch five and Al Horford. He even brought up the point that he thought Jimmy Butler not coming back to the Sixers was a mistake, and that had to do with
the juicy.
That was up there with the many juicy tidbits. But yeah, kind of the opinion that Simmons is someone who needs the ball in his hands. Butler is as well, and from Embiid's perspective, the Sixers made the choice to go ahead with Ben Simmons, who you'll recall shortly after free agency got this 5-year rookie max extension from the Sixers. So yeah, I think we were all grateful that Joel Embiid was honest. That's always something we appreciate from the folks we cover. And as soon as he stopped talking, everyone thought, all right, time to listen back, transcribe everything he said, and fill all the Sixers fans in on all the high quality material that we got.
Curious, is it weird like that when you get so much at the end of a presser, which like precipitates even more questions, but you're not really in a situation where you can even ask more questions?
Yes and no. I think in this situation, he didn't.
All the questions were answered.
Right. Any potential follow-up questions were answered as he talked for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But yes, I mean, Sixers PR had said that was the last question. So like it or not, we were done. But certainly I don't think there was a feeling of folks being unsatisfied with Joel Embiid's answer in that scenario.
Do you gain the inference from what Joel Embiid said, particularly based on things he has said previously about the Jimmy Butler situation, that he thought it was a mistake? We know the relationship him and Jimmy had and still have to this day. They had a lot of success playing together. I mean, that game 7 in Toronto, obviously will live in infamy for Sixers fans, but had a few bounces going a different way, it wouldn't have been Joel Embiid crying walking off the court. Kawhi Leonard and the Raptors might not have gone on to the championship. So probably, I think they were closer to the heights they want to reach in that game than they were in the Hawks game 7. Would you agree with that? Or
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. Especially given that team didn't have much time together when you consider Tobias Harris was a February acquisition. Butler was acquired in November, and the Sixers tried to put those pieces together as best they can. I think you can also imagine a scenario where Jimmy Butler does resign long term, and the Sixers ideally do a little bit better job restocking that bench. You recall in that Toronto series, James Ennis was by a good margin their best bench player. So that's a team where if you have Butler and Harris and Embiid and Ben Simmons, and you acquire one or two good shooters off the bench, on vet minimum contracts looking to play on a contender, that becomes probably the favorite in the Eastern Conference. Yeah, I think that particular moment in our very eventful recent Sixers history has to stand out as worthy of a lot of regret. Both in terms of like, okay, what if Kawhi hadn't made that shot? What if the Sixers had won in overtime? And then, but also just even if they lose that game, what if Jimmy Butler does come back to this team? But it's all what ifs.
Well, I'm asking that question because I'm curious, based on what Embiid said there at the presser, particularly relating to the Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons situation, and keeping in mind the things he said in the past about wanting Jimmy to stick around. Is he saying that he would prefer Jimmy over Ben? Is that the inference? Can we go that far? Like they should have kept Jimmy and figured something else out with Ben? Or did you draw that same, connect those dots?
I don't think we can go quite that far. I mean, what he said is Ben Simmons like needs the ball in his hands, and Jimmy Butler is the same way. So that's not to say the two could never
Couldn't
play together,
coexist.
but there would have been serious concerns there as long as Ben Simmons remained the type of player who needs a lot of shooting around him, who doesn't take many jump shots himself, who sees himself as a lead ball handler, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think he was saying that directly. I mean, amidst all of this, he did reiterate, like on several occasions, we're a better team with Ben Simmons. Like I want him to be here, but I have to focus on the players who are here now. So though much of his sentiments were not aligned with the notion of like, I want to play with Ben Simmons, he still did really want to make that point that he recognizes Simmons is valuable and that the Sixers are a better team with him. But he, just to me, after hearing those comments, it's difficult to envision anytime soon Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid playing basketball together again. But this has taken some unpredictable twists and turns, so we'll see exactly what happens.
Nobody does off-season drama like the 76ers. I mean, maybe even in-season drama like the 76ers. I want to take a 30,000-foot view for a second and make two macro points and get your perspective on them. And I'll start with Joel Embiid. He's, the talent is incomparable in some regards. You see the 7-foot dude who only learned basketball, later, quote unquote, in his, upbringing, and kind of got thrown into the fire with becoming what he is now. And he's embraced that, and the talent is what it is. It's just so much fun to watch. And then you take this connection with the community, with playing tennis here in local tennis courts, and the basketball stuff, and being in the clubs in Philly, and just at the NFL draft, he and Simmons were there. Point being, as a Philadelphia athlete, he hasn't won a title, which some people, say that he needs to do in order to become, on this Mount Rushmore of Philly athletes. But to me, when you put it all together and what he is currently in this present day, it's kind of like there hasn't been anyone like this. And, there's been the injuries and the things that, the weight and the conditioning and things that people have harped on. But in all of that, in the complete totality of Joel Embiid, I just feel like what he is giving us is unprecedented and already makes him one of the greatest athletes in the history of Philly sports. Just the talent and the openness and honesty indicative of what he said about the Ben Simmons situation last week. To me, all of that together makes him one of those Mount Rushmore type people. Well, how do you see what legacy he's building so far?
Yeah, I'm not sure he's there quite yet, but I think the trajectory is undeniably like this is a future Hall of Fame player as long as nothing catastrophic happens. And I do think he's been able to form a profound connection with a lot of Sixers fans because, him and the fans have grown up together. And the patience, you talked about perhaps some folks feeling like the process wasn't worth it or just frustrated by where the Sixers are at now at post process. But at least with Joel Embiid, waiting was very much worth it. Him not being healthy for his first two seasons and people just having to imagine what he could be. And now we see, this is an MVP caliber sort of player. But, all-time great players, you don't think of them as guys who never get past the second round. So I'm not even sure he has to win an NBA championship, although that's, of course, the ultimate goal. But I think for him to ascend to that just esteemed, like
Iverson-ish level.
Yeah, maybe Iverson.
Hard to use Iverson as an example, but just to have that regard of someone who's.
You even think about Allen Iverson. I mean, he won one NBA Finals game in his career, but the fact that he made the finals and led the Sixers there in heroic fashion, I think was enough for a lot of people in terms of like a deep playoff run. But, winning one playoff round and then losing a couple of devastating game sevens, it's probably not quite enough yet for Joel Embiid in the eyes of many Sixers fans who I think see him as capable of more when it comes to leading a team to either the promised land or just very, very deep in the NBA playoffs. But he's got a lot of years left to accomplish that. And he's locked in here until he's
under contract for most of it. So,
so
yeah, definitely.
The path is continues to be very, very promising. But he's got some work left to do on the legacy front, and we'll see if he pulls that off.
Yeah, well put. Great opinion. I just see the honesty of like a Charles Barkley mixed with the unique talent of like a Iverson coming together and Joel Embiid in a way that we haven't been able to enjoy or see for quite some time. How long has it been since the Philadelphia 76ers, the Philly sports fan base in general has begged for a unique, uber talented player like Joel Embiid? But the jury is still out, as you said. Other macro point I wanted to make is regarding Ben Simmons' salary. So we talked about it leading up to the podcast. We've detailed the fines and what he can accrue when he gets paid. Here, 25% of his salary was withheld from him. Over $8 million here, October 2nd, I believe it was. So I'm looking at this holdout thing and I'm thinking about, the precedents that have been set. And part of me looks at like the whole Clutch Sports Rich Paul aspect of this Ben Simmons saga, because in some ways it mimics what Anthony Davis did with the Pelicans. So I'm curious if you think, are we caught in part of this, clutch sports blueprint of how to move, star athletes and get them to places they want to be and out of the teams that they don't want to be in? Maybe Ben Simmons doesn't reap the haul that the Pelicans got for Anthony Davis, and he shouldn't, because they're not, Ben is probably a little bit less of a player than Anthony Davis, although, they're obviously both, highly regarded superstar type athletes. But are we caught in this clutch sports blueprint of they get the, reports and messages out there from various, reporting sources, the Athletic, ESPN, et cetera, and it kind of muddies the waters a bit, and then eventually the superstar or star player is traded. Are we kind of caught in that blueprint, do you think? Is there something to that?
Well, I think it's fair to discern that Clutch Sports / Ben Simmons's camp has been making a lot of efforts to portray things in a way that is advantageous to them, and to get messages out there that essentially the Sixers are deserving of a lot of blame, or just, hold some culpability for where things stand now, and the fact that the two sides are at this standoff. But I think I'm just skeptical overall that the public narratives, if you will, actually matter that much here. I think, like, what ultimately is most important is the discussion that these executives are having amongst themselves, and where Ben Simmons's value is seen at. And I think what's relevant, it is relevant that he's not at camp, and that he seems quite firm in his desire to not return to the Sixers. But as far as, this report one day says he doesn't think things can work with Embiid, this report another day says the team didn't build well around him, or, whatever.
Or he doesn't like the fans or whatever.
Yeah, I think the impact of that is probably negligible. But I think certainly that Ben Simmons is not here, it makes things murkier, and it puts the Sixers in a tough spot in some ways, for sure, because teams can't see, like, did he make any improvements, maybe offensively, or, is he healthy? Is he, at least willing to play basketball games again? There are a lot of unanswered questions as long as he is holding out. But the efforts of his agency to have influence in the media, or that sort of thing, I'm not sure that plays a huge role in all of this.
The Sixers will get to basketball, though, and we will talk about enough fluff, get to some basketball stuff after we take a quick timeout. Ready to make a move? A Wilmington University education can take you where you want to go. WilmU works online or in person. Learn more at wilmu.edu. Yes, we have basketball here. Oddly enough, the Sixers playing against one of the suitors supposedly for Ben Simmons, or a team that was interested in him, the Toronto Raptors. We talk about the Sixers drama in the offseason. Toronto embroiled in drama as well, returning to Toronto to actually play basketball this season after spending so much time in Florida because of the COVID restrictions. And they very much seem warranted, considering the way Delta variants and things have spread, and some of these super spreader teams traveling from place to place. And before we knew as much as we do now about COVID-19, which still we're trying to figure things out. But all that said, the Raptors are back. Oddly enough, not a place where the Sixers have had great memories, considering the Kawhi Leonard shot we talked about earlier. But with that said, Noah, there's been an interesting development in camp where the second unit has been outplaying the first unit a bit. Now, we'll see the first unit here on the floor tonight. Does any of that carry over here into this game, do you think? Or is the first unit better for having gone through those wars with the second unit where they can see, the warts and the things that they need to correct, coming into this first preseason game and carry that through training camp in order to be a better squad?
Yeah, my sense would be probably a little bit of both. Is notable, of course, that Joel Embiid will not be playing in this preseason opener. Doc Rivers said he doesn't expect like any of the 4 veteran starters to play in every preseason game. Just isn't necessary, isn't logical. But no known health concerns with Embiid. He seems to be moving well. Rivers said he's been participating in like 98% of practice reps. So nothing grave going on here. Just he's not playing in every preseason game. And so I'd imagine Andre.
But worth noting, of course, because he had the partial meniscus tear that they didn't have surgery on and he allowed to heal. So I think that does kind of get swept under the rug in some aspects, because for so long, every injury that he had was front of mind for Sixers fans. But maybe now it's not as pertinent considering the Simmons situation, considering so many other things that people are talking about.
Yeah. I mean, his health is always a topic worth monitoring, even when all indications are that he's good to go, just because he's so important to this team and he's a very large person with a very extensive injury history. But anyway, no Joel Embiid. My expectation would be that Andre Drummond would start. I guess theoretically, Paul Reed would be another option in that spot if Rivers wants to do something where he wants to keep that second unit together. But I would think that the second unit will look decent in the preseason. Rivers has mentioned a bunch that George Niang is valuable because of the shooting and the respect he commands because of that shooting ability, but also just because he's a really intelligent, selfless player. And I'm curious to see how he looks, but my sense is those are qualities that probably will translate well to game action. Someone who can work effectively around ball dominant players. But certainly will be interesting to see how Shake Milton looks as the lead ball handler, whether Matisse Thybulle is shooting threes with confidence and making them, how Furkan Korkmaz looks, and of course Andre Drummond, one of the new guys, how he does with that second unit. But yeah, so far all indications are that they've played well. Apparently the first unit did get them back a little in the last couple of days of camp. But good competition there is always something you like to see. And at least so far, the second unit has provided that to the starters.
Yeah, excellent observation, because you want the second unit pushing the first unit. And particularly based on what, guys have said, we talked about Shake Milton in the last podcast, of him wanting to be on the floor in the closing minutes. So he's out there with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. Tyrese Maxey all of a sudden thrust into this new role with Ben Simmons' absence. You mentioned George Niang. I have identified Matisse Thybulle as the guy I'm watching the most to see how he's grown from last season to this season, considering the Olympic experience that he's gained, and hopefully a better three-point shot to come along with it, because we intend to see the defense ratcheted up and maybe him pushing to try to make, not necessarily in his mind try to make a first team all defense, but his skill level being of that caliber, which some might say already is there. But I'm looking to see him put it together against competition. So it's the first preseason game. Expectations shouldn't be extremely high, but for guys who are out there trying to show their worth and prove themselves, every opportunity is an opportunity. Also worth mentioning that tonight's game will not be on NBC Sports Philadelphia. You can catch it on 97.5 The Fanatic, and if you have League Pass, you can watch it there. But Kate Scott, Ala Abdel-Nabi, you'll see for the home games for the 76ers. The Flyers have the Wells Fargo Center tonight. Check out the Flyers Talk podcast with Jordan Hall, Taryn Hatcher, and Joe Fordyce. But what do you think about the point of Toronto being a team that was interested in Simmons? You would think that they would be keeping an eye on the situation, looking at maybe what Matisse and potential other guys that might be included in that deal might do out on the floor tonight. Is this like a de facto audition in some aspects if Toronto decides that they want to go all in on Simmons?
Well, I would wager that the Raptors front office is not unfamiliar with Tyrese Maxey and Matisse Thybulle's skill set. I mean, we recall Kyle Lowry, of course, was on the radar of the Sixers and many other teams before last season's trade deadline. So I would be very surprised if any developments in this game swayed Toronto one way or another on those two players. I think they're both players that would logically be attractive to a lot of teams. But I think overall, it is fair to say that if Ben Simmons is still not playing games early into the regular season and a trade still hasn't come to be, then teams will be watching with a lot of interest to see, okay, like, is Tyrese Maxey holding the fort down? Is Matisse Thybulle locking down other stars? These are questions that teams will have a lot of curiosity about. And then just overall, like, how do the Sixers start? I mean, if the Sixers start very poorly, needless to say, that's not a great development. If Maxey slides in, no problem, then certainly the Sixers can at least make the case of, all right, we don't need to do anything with any great urgency because this Simmons-less team we have right now has been performing just fine. So preseason, I would think probably not that significant to the point you make, but early in the regular season, yeah, that teams are going to be observing that with great interest. I think preseason overall, I mean, I'm reminding myself this, like, last year, Matisse Thybulle didn't play well in preseason, seemed to be like maybe the 11th member of the rotation. And I remember after the last preseason game, I asked Doc Rivers just about like where Thybulle's at and what he would need to do to increase his stock. And Rivers just said, oh yeah, he, had an ankle injury early in camp. Matisse is going to be fine. It's going to be important for us. Doc Rivers was right about that.
He was, right.
Yeah, and Shake Milton had a great preseason, and then as the regular season wore on, some of that hype and buzz about him maybe wore off a little bit. So we don't want to read too much into the preseason. Not to say that we shouldn't be excited that the Sixers are back or that every single thing we see is irrelevant, but the preseason's the preseason, and a lot of it's just about getting into shape, getting continuity, and just getting back into the flow of things, in my mind.
I remember watching a podcast with Sam Cassell. He was talking about how, when he was a player on the Rockets, and he would take preseason so serious. It meant everything to him. And all the veterans were just kind of like sleepwalking through it. They lost for like 40 points. And, Rudy Tomjanovich asked, everybody to like go out to a bar after the game. And to the veterans, it just was getting in shape, as you mentioned, getting their legs under them. And, back then preseason was a lot longer. Training camp was a lot longer. They played their preseason schedule and then went back to training camp. So it was, it's funny. You make a great point, as you often do, about the fact that it is about getting in shape. It is about, getting your legs under you or preparing for the long haul. Something you said, though, is very interesting to me because you mentioned the Shake Milton comparison from preseason to the regular season. Doc Rivers lauded Shake in a way that many of us didn't expect, but definitely latched onto with the comparison that Shake had that Lou Williams, Jamal Crawford potential of being that sixth man for the Sixers off the bench. He needed to improve his defense to get more minutes, and which Shake is definitely focused on. But that was something that everybody latched onto because Doc made that comparison. Here we are, Tyrese Maxey, year 2. Doc, long in the tooth around the NBA, has seen a lot of people come and go and play with so many people. And coaches definitely have players that they latch onto and connect with. Doc being a former point guard, you can see why he might have some affinity towards Tyrese Maxey. But he made the comparison that Maxey reminded him a bit of a young Rondo, which I'm not sure how to take that in some aspects because I just see Maxey as being so much more explosive in ways that Rondo wasn't. But it's also a great compliment because Rondo has been around a long time, has won titles, has shown the propensity to be huge in big moments, and has some incredible stat lines that make your jaw drop. What did Doc really mean by that, Noah, and how did that come across to you?
Yeah, I thought it was a spot on comparison, at least with the point he was trying to make of, on that 2007-8 Celtics team, Rondo, I believe, 21 years old, second year Kentucky product. So obviously similarities there.
Yeah.
And then he's in a spot around a lot of star talent, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen. And his job as the point guard of that team is to ensure those guys get their shots. So Rivers made the point of like, any shot you take is one that is not going to one of those guys who are our shot makers, who are our lead scorers, and that's something he needs to convey to Maxey. And I think it is true that one of the adjustments here for Maxey is not so much like being a point guard and a lead ball handler, but after a season in which he was primarily a second unit player, now he's on a unit with all of the Sixers' best players, and that's different. And the Sixers don't want him to lose his aggressiveness and to stop being a dynamic driver and someone who puts pressure on the defense in that way. But they also need Tobias Harris to get the ball where he needs the ball, and they need Maxey to drive and kick to Seth Curry, and they need Joel Embiid to get his post ups and Maxey to be in the right spots, for spacing purposes when Embiid does have the ball in the post. So there are a lot of little nuances of one being a point guard and then two being a point guard around stars. And I think that is the larger point that Rivers intended to make with the Rondo comparison. So I think it's valid, and we're all really curious to see what Tyrese Maxey brings to the table. Rivers has said to us a few times, essentially, that like the starters aren't set in stone. So while Maxey has been starting in practice, the Sixers have quite a few options here. Matisse Thybulle, would seem to be one of the stronger ones, especially in a world where the Sixers are facing a team with multiple standout perimeter threats or a perimeter star who Danny Green might not be well suited to guard. So yeah, Maxey has been starting, but no guarantee he's going to start every game. However, going to play important minutes in preseason next to star players, and will be really intriguing to see how he does.
Bit of a puzzle for Maxey to figure out just how he does fit in and execute those things Doc talked about while also keeping his own identity, because he's definitely built more in the mold of the current point guard of the, Westbrook, John Wall, get your own shot, Dame Lillard type of mold, great floater in between game, where Rondo was definitely more pass first. So it will definitely be up to Tyrese to figure out how he keeps everyone involved if he is on that first unit or even when he's on the floor, period, and also continues to do all the dynamic things that make him unique and special and the type of guy that you can see in that starting lineup. So it'll be interesting to see how he balances those things.
Agreed. Yeah, I'd say the one thing that the Sixers are asking him to do, which I imagine will be natural, is push the pace, because Ben Simmons is exceptional in that regard. Like the
get up and go. Yeah.
On-off transition statistics. This is from Cleaning the Glass. Like the last 3 years, he was the 99th or 100th percentile. Like the Sixers got so many more transition possessions when Ben Simmons was on the floor pushing the pace. And the Sixers will ask Maxey to pick up that slack. And it shouldn't be a problem, because this is probably, him and Ben Simmons were 1 and 2 on the Sixers in terms of speed last season. So the raw pace is there, and it's just on him to constantly be thinking of how to push the ball up the floor and just get the Sixers up and down. While also, of course, being a smart decision maker and being a point guard who, is prudent with the ball in his hands. But that angle of it, I don't imagine being much of a challenge for him because he loves to play fast. He always brings a ton of energy to the table, and you think that will continue to be the case even if he's a starting point guard.
Plenty of excellent things to latch on to, Sixers fans, outside of this Ben Simmons stuff. That will really take care of itself. I don't see the Sixers making any moves until it's necessary. I think you'll see the fines start to build up and players who are here will start to shine. And I think it will be a situation of the Sixers trying to get to the trade deadline and, wait for something to happen with these other teams in order to facilitate a Simmons trade. In the meantime, there's plenty of people to look out for and enjoy. Matisse Thybulle being one of the guys I have my eye on specifically. George Niang right there. I know Noah is interested to see what he brings as well. So I think the Sixers will be better off than people think until the Simmons thing is resolved. So delighted to get to enjoy some Sixers basketball here tonight. We'll see how things play out. Noah, anything specific you're working on for the website right now you want to mention?
Yeah, I just encourage people if they haven't had a chance. I had observations for every day of camp down there in Camden. So if you want to sort of get caught up, feel free to check those out. I'll have observations on tonight's game and continuing to be writing and monitoring about many of the storylines we discussed here.
We will hear from Kate Scott for the first time later this week. We got to get her on the podcast. I think that should be our next objective, is to get Kate on the podcast. Because they have a home game Thursday? Is that right?
They do have a home game Thursday.
Okay.
Which I should mention I will be sidelined for. I'll have best man duties starting Thursday for my best friend's wedding. So I'm upset that I've got to miss it, but I'm looking forward to that event for sure.
Hey, bro, that's dope. I had a bad breakdown at my best man situation. I started crying giving the speech. It was sappy and slobbery. So I hope you don't have to have that same situation, because they run it back every now and again and kind of poke fun at all the little things I was slobbering and crying about. But that's cool, bro. Nothing like living life, and especially seeing your friends and people you love and adore, do well. So good luck to your friend that's getting married, and I hope everything works out for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to stay composed. I know it'll be an emotional occasion,
Oh,
but
man.
I'll try to just go into business mode and lock it down and deliver that speech.
Yeah, that's the best, great approach on your part. But hey, we appreciate everyone for listening to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. Our objective is Kate Scott here on the podcast in the near future, so we'll work on that and bring you all of her delightful perspectives and her story and everything else. But for Ben Berry and Noah Levick, I'm Danny Pommells. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.